It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM. Indiana in the Morning is presented by First Commonwealth Bank. And that guy over there is State House Majority Leader Dave Reed, who normally at this time of the year we're talking to about how come the budget's late. So this year we turned it around and say, how come the budget was so early?
It's finally nice. I have to admit, in my 16 years in the State House, it's the first time I've actually been able to be back in Indiana the last week of June, because the budget was done, complete, everything wrapped up, and put to bed for the year.
So why? What were the factors that led to this agreement this quickly?
Look, I think there are a number of different factors. I think the overarching factor is the fact that revenue came in pretty much so on target. The economy is doing better. You look at the national economy, it's doing well. You look at the state economy, it's finally starting to catch up. You look at the unemployment rate across Pennsylvania, it's lower than it's been in quite some time. And, with revenues coming in with no deficit to have to account for, and the projections looking pretty good for this upcoming year as well, I think it makes it a whole heck of a lot easier discussion when you're not talking about having to fill that budget deficit. And the governor, to his testament, was more realistic in his starting point back in February. He wasn't asking for major tax increases. He just, kind of reiterated some of the taxes he looked at in the past, the severance tax and the fee for state police service for rural communities, neither of which ended up being part of the final budget agreement. But, I think overall, folks, after three and a half years of budget discussions, looked at those numbers and said, look, we can do this in a reasonable fashion. We can increase some money to education, keep spending below the rate of inflation, and with no new revenue. It was a recipe to get it done, not just on time, but early.
All right, so let's talk about some of the elements of the budget, and particularly we always go straight to education funding. We start with basic, we go to higher, and your impressions of how both of those negotiations went and the allocations coming back here to Indiana County.
I think they went fairly well. With basic ed, you're seeing the $100 million increase for our schools across the Commonwealth, which means some significant money here to Indiana County schools. A really nice increase for career and technical education, which I think is a focal point here in Western Pennsylvania, of getting more folks trained with skills to be able to operate in the workforce immediately with the projected shortage over the next decade. With higher education, a 3.3% increase to schools like IUP should certainly help, not just our community being a university community, but also the students who are looking to attend schools like IUP and other state system schools over the next couple years. So I think education as a whole, made out very, very well in this budget. And that's, in addition to some increases in pre-K funding and special education. So I think the biggest and really the only increases in this budget that were significant were in the education realm.
Now, you talked about just moments ago the expected job shortage in particularly technical fields, the hands jobs, jobs where you use your hands. One of the things that the governor did almost immediately after the budget passage was he announced that state workers are going to have their minimum wage raised, and not only this time, but then again shortly after. Your impressions of that and how that fits in with the way wages are, particularly here in Western Pennsylvania. There are a lot of jobs that obviously need to be increased in terms of what people are making in order to make a living wage.
Yeah, I think when you look at what the governor did, I'm always a little bit suspect of that sort of unilateral decision. Now, he obviously has the authority to do it. Being the head of the executive branch, he sets the pay scale for the executive branch employees. I think overall, when you look at where we're at in Western Pennsylvania, when you look at the projections over the next decade, you're looking in the western half of the state a shortage of 80 to 100,000 workers with those skilled labor type of skills to be able to fill in the gaps from the folks who are going to be retiring over the next 10 years. And we just do not have the folks prepared to go into those jobs. Even here locally, if you look at, folks with a skill or even with a CDL, in high demand right now. Mm-hmm. We need to do a better job with our educational system as a whole of aligning the folks that we're training for the jobs that are out there, because most of these jobs, you're not talking about minimum wage jobs, you're talking about good paying jobs, family sustaining jobs that companies are desperate to get back, to fill in those vacancies so that they can move forward as well.
Yeah, that affordability study that came out a couple of weeks ago was really eye-opening to see how low Indiana County ranks, for instance, in relation to the other 67 counties in terms of being able to afford the life's basic necessities on what people are making now. The job demand is going to, in theory, increase the amount that people are going to make for those jobs, and that should really improve.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. To get a good quality worker with the skills that you're looking at, you're going to have to pay that worker a decent salary, and they should be paid a decent salary. They should be able to make a living, provide for their family, and, live their own version of the American dream. So I think when you've got a shortage of workers and a high demand with the vacancies that are out there, I think that bodes well for our workers, not just in Indiana County, but across the region.
So here you are. It's the beginning of July. You have only a few months left in the State House before you move on and become an observer of what's happening in Harrisburg. What are your legislative priorities? Well, how do you expect to spend this summer?
Well, I'm not sure yet, because I haven't really had a summer for a number of years, particularly the last couple as majority leader. It's been constant budget negotiations throughout the summer. Look, I want to wrap things up. There are a couple issues I want to make sure, a couple things I want to get done here in Indiana County, projects that we've been working on that I want to see hopefully come to a conclusion before I exit in November. And then, in Harrisburg, I'm sure there'll be some issues on tap for the fall that we'll take a look at. But I also want to, start the transition process where, I have my offices here locally prepared to turn it over to whoever my successor will be. And also, from the majority leader's office in Harrisburg, I want to make sure things are in good working order so that I can turn it over to the next majority leader. I think that's one of the responsibilities in a position like this is, you don't just flip the switch on a day you're moving out, you get everything ready so the next person can hit the ground running. Mm-hmm.
Now, you'll recall that when you started in Harrisburg, you were one of the low people on the totem pole. You had to build your way up, and that's going to be the case for whoever your successor is as well. There's a lot of work for that person once they get to Harrisburg to find their footing. How was it that you found yours, and is there any sort of leadership or guidance you can give to whoever that person's going to be?
Well, mine was a little bit of a baptism by fire. I was not able to have any conversations with the person that I succeeded, nor were they really interested in, handing the baton off to the next person. And I understand that because, it was a contested election that I happened to become victorious over the incumbent. So I kind of started with a blank slate and had to learn from scratch. I don't want the person who takes over for me to have that same disadvantage. I want to make sure that, I can give them whatever knowledge I have and, what other information I have that can be useful for them so that they don't have that same type of learning curve. You're always going to have a learning curve, but I don't think the person who held the position before has to make it more difficult on the new person, because that doesn't help the community, with representation in Harrisburg. So I want to make that a little bit of a smoother transition and help whoever takes my spot.
Well, that's one of the things about getting to Harrisburg is getting to know the people that you're working with and finding the right ones to act as mentors when you're new to the position, and also finding a voice. Sometimes it can be difficult finding a voice within that chamber, and I know that's a big challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you realize very quickly, or at least you should realize very quickly, you've got to know a lot about a lot of different topics, but you also have got to kind of pick your battles, pick your specialties, pick areas that are of particular interest to the community you represent to focus on and to really become an expert on and really push forward with that sort of policy. Over the years, I've kind of focused on economic development, focused on energy, because that really, was a cross-section of what we had going on here in Indiana County. And education, by default with the university and with our school system. So I'm hopeful that the next person will realize, pick your lane and try to move forward as quickly as you can on those issues that are of major importance here in Indiana County. And I have a feeling the next person, will want to focus on property tax elimination and economic development and infrastructure, just, some core issues that mean a lot here in Indiana County.
So as you think about these next however many years, take it a decade into the future, what are the big issues that people will be dealing with in this region as we continue and we move forward? Energy was certainly that with you. Does it stay the same?
I think it probably adapts a little bit. If you think about it, 10 years ago, we were talking about energy from the perspective of energy independence, that we were relying too much on Middle Eastern energy to run America and to run Pennsylvania. Now, we're a very independent, energy independent state and a fairly energy independent nation for that matter. We're not really talking about energy independence. We're talking about, okay, how do we use these resources in a responsible, respectful manner to both the economy and to the environment. So I think that's one issue that's changed a great deal over the last decade. I think over the next decade, you're going to see a particular focus on workforce development just because of the changes in our labor force. You're going to see a focus on, how do we adapt education, particularly higher education, so there's a better coordination of efforts to get workers trained for the jobs that are going to be out there. Certainly with an aging population across the nation and people living longer, healthcare is going to be of utmost importance. It really started to uptick in the conversation with Obamacare in 2010. I think that conversation is going to continue over the next decade. And as the federal government puts more of the responsibility, back onto the states, I think you're going to see more of a discussion at the state level on how we manage, not just our healthcare system, but our entitlement system. And, how do we provide services for folks who are truly needy in the most effective, efficient manner possible? I think that's going to be a major discussion over the next decade.
And, of course, the question, will we in 10 years be paying $49 for a gallon of gas? That's the
will we still be using gasoline to power vehicles? Who knows?
That's a good point.
10 years ago, we weren't really talking about social media the way we are today, and look at how it's changed society. So you just don't know, how technology and the economy and the world is going to change in 10 short years.
No, you really don't. Well, we appreciate your time here this morning. We'll talk with you again next month.
And happy belated 4th of July, Todd.
You too. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM.